For final community talk of the Polkadot Decoded main stage day one, we chose Moonbeam. Many of you are familiar with Moonbeam as they joined us last year at Polkadot Decoded. Well, I guess it wasn't quite a year ago, a couple months ago, last December, but they really made so much progress since then and helped so many Ethereum native teams into the multi-chain future that we all envision. So we thought an update from Derek was warranted. They really have been doing tremendous work onboarding established projects as well as new teams. The numbers really don't lie. Moonbeam has helped over 150 teams as they plan their multi-chain deployment. That's more than most linear mono-chain smart contract platforms out there can boast by quite a stretch. Through these conversations, several common deployment patterns have emerged. In this talk, Derek will highlight 3 major multi-chain deployment patterns, including the benefits, challenges, and opportunities that came with each. Derek, welcome to New York. Take it away.
Thanks, and thanks for hosting me here in the studio. This is great. I'm Derek Yu. I'm the CEO of PureStake, and we're the team that's building the project Moonbeam. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about our project just as context. First, Moonbeam is to be a parachain on both the Kusama as well as the Polkadot networks. The goal of the project really is to provide the easiest possible development environment for developers that want to deploy applications and build applications on Polkadot. And we really felt that it was an important thing to build, to provide options to developers, so they had options. They could choose substrate, which we in fact have used to build Moonbeam, but that they could also have these other options for development to fill kind of an important need. We've worked quite closely with Parity and others on an Ethereum implementation in Substrate. That's really a core part of what our Parachain is right now. And that includes quite a bit of work around all of those pieces that you need to have a full working Ethereum deployment. So things like an EVM, a Web3 RPC. We've done work around the account system, and a lot of work around the integrations in the platform. So, and I'll talk a little bit about those things in this talk. But I wanted to use Moonbeam as a way to talk about something broader, right? So we're seeing certain trends in the market, and I wanted to use kind of what we're seeing on Moonbeam as a way to talk about these broader trends. In particular, this trend from what I'd call mono-chain deployments to multi-chain deployments. It's something that is happening right now. People's thinking is changing about what it means to build a protocol or decentralized application. And so just to give a bit of additional context, we have at this point a very substantial ecosystem of partners that are building on Moonbeam. Some of them are pictured here. Some of them will be announced in the near future. And even beyond this set of projects, as Peter mentioned, we've talked to a lot of different teams to understand what their deployment strategy looks like and how they're thinking about the market. And so really, this is the base, kind of the data, or kind of the conversations that helped drive some of the ideas that are in this talk. And so just I would kind of start with the first question of why is it that projects are pursuing multi-chain deployment strategies? And after all, mono-chain deployment strategies worked fine for a long time. So why is it that things have shifted to this multi-chain approach these days? And I identify a few drivers here that are common among a lot of the people we've spoken with. I would say that this desire for the protocols to get at new users, to grow their user base, and to grow, particularly for DeFi applications, the assets that they're servicing, are some of the key drivers. So these protocols are kind of hungry, right? They want to kind of grow, they want to expand, they want to kind of address more users and assets. And not all users, not all assets are on any given chain at this point, as we kind of enter into this increasingly multi-chain kind of environment. So expanding to different chains is just a way to kind of grow these protocols. And that's something that we're seeing quite a bit of these days. And it's a lot of the partner projects that are working with us are deploying to Moonbeam in addition to other chains. This last point that I have around available block space, I would say that is also an important driver. So the simple fact there is that you can't address all users and use cases from a single chain, and particularly from folks that are coming from an Ethereum-based deployment, there, given the current fees, there are definitely a lot of users and use cases that can't be served there. And so there's kind of this thirst for available block space that's driving these protocols to expand to different chains. There's one subtle other point, which is that I think for a lot of teams now, particularly as we'll talk about later, that are pursuing this kind of EVM targeted approach, if the protocol teams themselves don't expand, someone else is going to do it for them. So we have heard this from a number of teams that, if they don't expand, then someone might, it's all open source, right? They might take their code and kind of fork their repository and then, deploy it for them. So then they'll have kind of a competing project if they don't do it themselves. So that's kind of what's happening, in the market. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, different approaches that we see, just kind of broadly speaking. And so I'll go through each of these in turn, going from the simplest approach, taking a bridged approach. This kind of ported or EVM targeted approach is kind of a lot of, kind of what a lot of the projects we're working with now are pursuing. And then ultimately, where I think things are going in the future is something I'm calling a native multi-chain approach. So I'll spend some time talking about what that means and what that is. And so just digging into each of these approaches, so when I talk about a bridged multi-chain approach, really the idea here from a developer standpoint is, look, I'm going to deploy in one place, but I'm going to use different bridges or cross-chain integrations to both move perhaps my native protocol asset out to other destinations, and think about it in the context of a DeFi protocol to kind of bring assets into me basically, so I can service them. And so this idea has been around for some time, but there's a lot of innovation happening in this area right now, and there's a lot of different approaches being pursued to cross-chain integrations. So even to use Moonbeam as an example, we have several different categories of integrations here. We have point-to-point bridges, like our deployment of ChainSafe's Chainbridge to connect us back to the Ethereum mainnet. We have integration networks like Axelar and Ren that are kind of multi-point integrations, right? Kind of allow movement of assets from multiple different destinations, to and from Moonbeam. Use case specific bridges, like we're partnering with a team at mynft.com to create a bridge that's specific to NFT use cases. And last but not least, I think as Parachains come to life, the Polkadot native integrations are something that we're very, very excited by. I see this as one of the key benefits of being a parachain on Polkadot is this ability to interact with other parachains, and ultimately I do see Polkadot being kind of a key kind of a point at which a lot of trade routes are kind of running, right? So a lot of trade routes will be running through Polkadot. It's going to be kind of a hub of commerce, in this multi-chain future. So those are all different kinds of integrations that would support this kind of bridged idea. Just moving on to this ported multi-chain idea, this is something that, again, like a lot of the projects we're working with are pursuing this idea. And so let me kind of use a specific example to try to make it clear what we're talking about here. So we have a partner, Linear Finance. They're building a synthetics platform. And so they have a strategy of deploying to 3 destinations, right? So Moonbeam, Ethereum, and Binance Smart Chain. And so the idea is that, and this is where the EVM targeted part comes in, each of these 3 deployment destinations is an Ethereum-like chain. So what that allows you to do is, they can take kind of more or less a single code base and deploy it 3 times, right? They can deploy it to Moonbeam, they can deploy it to Ethereum, they can deploy it to BSC, and they kind of minimize the amount of engineering effort that it takes to support these different chains. But then they're in 3 different places, right? So they can service the users and assets and different use cases on these different chains. And so you can see over on the right, if for their front end application, you kind of give the user the choice, right? They can connect to either Moonbeam or Ethereum or BSC, and the user is kind of aware of like kind of what chains are being supported, and you're kind of asking them to choose where it is that they want to perform certain actions. And so, yeah, I think a lot of teams are pursuing this kind of EVM targeted multi-chain deployment strategy at this point. I mean, we see some examples of teams that are even they're kind of making the front end kind of multi-chain aware, so they might be referring to the different backends as different markets or different, they're kind of representing that in the UI, but then having these separate kind of smart contract deployments on on different backend chains. So this is kind of I would call this kind of the state of the art, kind of right now. It does present some user experience challenges, which I'll talk about in a bit. But this is kind of what's happening. There's quite a bit of this happening right now. And so I'm just going to flip things around now and ask a separate question. So the question here is, what makes for a good deployment destination? So let's say that you want to be an attractive destination for these teams that are pursuing a multi-chain deployment. So what does that take? And we've learned quite a bit about this, in the last 6+ months that we've really been working with a lot of teams on deployments. And I would kind of categorize the key learnings into two main areas. So one area is that there's a lot of dependencies that are kind of outside of the core Ethereum implementation, right? So you can have a chain that is Ethereum-like, great, but that doesn't get you all the way there. And so to give an example of some of the partners we're working with on the DeFi side, they have dependencies with each other, right? So you can kind of go alone, right? None of these people can kind of go alone because they need other protocols to also be there in order to function. So for example, Cream, which provides a lending and borrowing service, they need an AMM like Sushi to function. Sushi in turn, needs stable coins like Frax or ArcX to serve as trading pairs, like on their DEX, and so on, right? So there's kind of this complicated set of dependencies, in the ecosystem itself, when you're trying to make for an attractive deployment environment. And then kind of digging in underneath, in terms of technical, kind of requirements, this is something we've learned a lot too. So we've gotten, a lot of, I'd call it feedback or maybe even complaints. And by the way, we love complaints. I think complaints are great. Complaints in the space are great because it tells you, one, that people care and like they're trying to get something to work, and two, it just makes it clear where there's more effort needed, right? So it leads, and that's driven a lot of our own roadmap in terms of where we need to spend more time with documentation or with additional feature work. As an example, a lot of teams were feeding back to us that we needed indexed data services like the Graph or Covalent to power kind of performant front ends. We got complaints around our block explorers and that we needed to provide advanced block explorers that could look inside of the EVM call stack. And so this kind of drove a lot of the work we did, oracles as well. A lot of the work that's gone on in the last 6 months has been kind of responding to these kind of complaints and kind of addressing, providing these things that are needed to make for a kind of a complete development environment. I wanted to just talk about one other point that I think is quite important, and that's UX. And so, the point I'd make here is that, a lot of the tools that are in this space now were really designed with a monochain deployment in mind. And, as we're moving into apps that are multi-chain, I think this is already starting to show some challenges. So as an example here, right, I mean, if you have kind of a wallet and it kind of expects to be connected to one chain, then when you're in a multi-chain environment, you're kind of forcing the user then to understand, well, which chain am I connected to? Do I need to switch from chain A to chain B? And, I kind of see this problem as only getting exacerbated over time as, I expect more and more specialized chains to appear. It can't be the case that users need to understand what all those chains are and what services they're providing. So I think this is kind of a key challenge as we move into, this multi-chain environment. And, I just want to kind of set it up that, this last category of multi-chain applications that I'm most excited about are these ones I call native multi-chain. And so what does that mean? And, this is something that I think Polkadot is really uniquely positioned to support, and is really one of the reasons why, we're, so bullish on Polkadot and building in this ecosystem. So let me give you an example, from Moonbeam's perspective of what this means. So of course, on Moonbeam, you can have, as a developer, you can deploy a local smart contract. So you can have an application with a contract and a front-end app that's interacting with that contract. That's just normal. That's kind of like Ethereum or other chains. But then we have these special integration smart contracts. We have a couple examples of this now, and we plan to add many more of these in the future. And so what these integration smart contracts do is they basically are a window. They look like just a regular smart contract from the EVM's perspective, but they're kind of a window. You can reach in and kind of perform more powerful substrate-based functions via these contracts. So things like cross-chain actions using XCMP, which is one of the primitives that one can use in Substrate to send messages between chains. In our case, I'll give you another example. We have a contract like this that is providing access to staking functionality on our chain, right? That was implemented in Substrate. And so I think this is quite a large design space of different services that we can offer to developers that are using the Ethereum tech stack. And the cool thing here is that, two things. I mean, one is the developer kind of is given this higher level service, so they don't necessarily need to, understand all of the details of the underlying implementation. They can look at it, but they don't need to kind of understand that when they're building their app. So there's kind of an abstraction layer there. And then the user also doesn't need to understand all these things, right? They can go look, it's an open system, but they're not forced to understand all of these different chains and what they do. So I think it's kind of a double win here, especially given the UX challenges that we just spoke about. And so, I wanted to just kind of conclude with a few thoughts. I mean, I think the question that I think is interesting is kind of why Polkadot, right? I mean, why is it that Polkadot is a good fit for what we're trying to do? And I'd offer kind of two main kind of points here, and perhaps three. And the first is that it's the power of Substrate, right? So I mean, Substrate is extremely powerful, and I think what it really does is it allows you to customize your chain at a very low level, and that's exactly what we needed to be able to provide this very Ethereum-like experience. And I just don't know of any other platform that will allow for that level of customization. So things like the accounts and keys on the system. We've made Ethereum-like. These are very low-level kind of changes we made that were uniquely enabled by Substrate. And then, Polkadot, it provides the networking, right? So you have these specialized chains such as ours and from other teams that you've seen today, and the ability for these chains to talk to each other, is extremely powerful, right? And I think this is something that, as Parachains come live on Kusama, we'll start to see the power of these interactions. And ultimately, our long-term vision is, we really want to provide a set of services. My mental model is like AWS, right? So we have AWS, you have these services that are very powerful and very simple to use. We kind of see a future where there's services like that, and maybe the services on Moonbeam are more like a compute service, right? A generic compute service. But ultimately, there'll be many infrastructural services that developers can use. And the key difference, of course, would be that that the services would be decent for an easy place to develop your application on Polkadot. We'd love to hear from you via one of the channels below. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Derek. I think we have some time here for a couple questions. First of all, and you touched on this a little bit, there was a question about other projects in the Polkadot ecosystem, Parachain projects or otherwise, that you're closely collaborating with. I actually interviewed Derek yesterday evening for the third episode of Behind the Code, so we got into some of this, and I think you had
allows for a richer, more expressivity, I guess is what I'd say. But it's this kind of fact that the structure of the software is such that we all need to collaborate very closely to achieve this, whole is greater than the sum of its parts use cases. And so I can see that. I can see that in the interactions between the teams, that we're working with. I mean, there's even some teams where maybe there's even some amounts of small overlap, right, in terms of target audience we're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. But that's the really cool thing about the Polkadot ecosystem is I think people kind of understand that we're all part of the same mission in a way, right? And available to help each other out. So
yeah, and the ability to, and I think we were talking about this with the third sort of group of projects you're working with, like these native multi-chain projects that are potentially coming to Moonbeam first to develop their idea, because there's a lot of Solidity developers out there. It's a good well of developers to tap. Can you talk a little bit about how you might envision a team starting out by deploying some Solidity code on Moonbeam and then sort of growing into Polkadot, potentially becoming a parachain themselves, and how you would look on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're very happy when something like that happens, right? Because when you're starting out, anytime you're starting out anything, right? I mean, you have some ideas, but you need to try them, you need to test them, you need to see if you're going to find that product market fit. So I think that exploring ideas is something that Moonbeam would be very good for, right? I mean, you can kind of quickly and cheaply deploy something to test the concept, and then once you find that product market fit, though, it may make more sense to be your own parachain, right? To develop in Substrate, and so we're quite happy if we can serve as kind of the on-ramp kind of stepping off point for teams that do that. nothing would make me happier, right?
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question, and I got to ask. Obviously, Parachains coming very soon to Kusama, Moon River. What's the strategy? What's the approach for getting that live on Kusama?
Yeah, I would say that even just before I was coming here, there's quite a lot of activity happening on that. I think that our whole team is really quite focused on the Moon River deployment. I would say that right now we're really working through the operational kind of plan of what steps are going to happen, how we can do it safely. For example, like one of the things we're working through right now is exactly like what the different phases will be post launch, where we enable successive degrees of functionality, much like was done on Kusama and on Polkadot, right? Because we're always trying to just make safety is kind of number one, like security and safety. So that's kind of the lens through which we're kind of looking at things. And
we're looking to collaborate, but the blockchain itself, I think Alice mentioned in the Behind the Code episode earlier, is like blockchains. These consensus systems are like adversarial environments at the consensus level. So having something like Kusama to actually be able to like put it out there in the world and see people try to mess with it a little bit is, I think, we found it very valuable launching Kusama, and I think teams launching layer one Parachains like yourself will also find it to be a useful experience, because obviously the Moonbeam launch should be, as we said with the Polkadot launch, boring.
Right.
Boring is great.
I mean, if it's boring, then yeah, exactly. And I can tell you, right, even just the things that it's forced us to think through now early is already invaluable, right? So yeah, I think we're, it's a culmination of quite a lot of effort over the last almost year and a half now, but we're really excited about it.
Amazing. I think that's going to wrap it up for the community talks for the day. Derek, thank you very much for traveling down from Boston. We will be back very shortly, so go grab a beer if you are of age to join us for a Barstool chat with Gavin Wood coming up next.